November 14, 1974, 9:47 p.m. Museum of Modern Art, Manhattan. Andy Warhol pointed his finger directly at Bob Dylan's face and said the words that would make 200 people stop breathing. That's not art. That's just noise with words. The Museum of Modern Art Gala was the event of the season. Artists, collectors, critics, socialites. Everyone who mattered in the New York art world was there. Black tie required, champagne flowing, modern art on the walls worth millions. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers. Candlelight reflected off wine glasses. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with cigarette smoke. This was 1970s New York cultural elite at its peak. Dylan sat at table 12. Dark suit, no tie, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd been invited as a gesture. The museum wanted to seem contemporary. Having Bob Dylan at your gala said something about being culturally aware. But Andy Warhol, pale, silver-wigged, black-suited Andy Warhol, had other ideas about Dylan's presence. Warhol stood at the head of Dylan's table, leaning forward, finger pointed, that deadpan face showing something close to contempt. "You make popular entertainment," Warhol continued, his voice flat, bored-sounding, which somehow made it worse. "We make art. There's a difference." The table went silent. 8 people frozen. Crystal glasses halfway to lips. A woman with diamonds had both hands pressed over her mouth. Dylan looked up at Warhol, those dark eyes unreadable behind cigarette smoke. "Is that what you think?" Dylan asked, voice quiet. "It's what everyone here thinks," Warhol said. "We're just too polite to say it." Have you ever watched someone get publicly dismissed and wondered how they'd respond? That's where 200 people were at 9:48 p.m. on November 14, 1974. To understand why Warhol attacked Dylan, you need to understand what was happening in the New York art world in 1974. Andy Warhol was at his absolute peak. The Factory, Interview Magazine, Studio 54. He transformed himself from commercial illustrator into the most famous artist in America. His Campbell's soup cans sold for hundreds of thousands. His portraits of Marilyn and Mao were iconic. He'd done something nobody thought possible. Made commercial art into high art. Made superficiality into sophistication. Made detachment into a philosophy. The art world worshipped him because Warhol had proven you could be critically acclaimed and commercially successful. You could be ironic and important. Bob Dylan represented something different, something Warhol found threatening. Dylan was a 1960s artifact, folk music gone electric, protest songs, authenticity, the opposite of Warhol's cool detachment. By 1974, Dylan had released Blood on the Tracks, raw, emotional, deeply personal songs about pain and loss. Everything the sophisticated art world considered embarrassing. Too sincere, too vulnerable. Warhol had been making comments about Dylan for months. Always the same theme. Dylan was yesterday's news. Too earnest. Not sophisticated enough for the modern world. The MoMA Gala was Warhol's territory, his world. And when Dylan walked in, 33 years old, famous but out of place, Warhol saw an opportunity, not just to dismiss Dylan, to make a statement about what art should be. Cold, ironic, surface over substance. That's what Warhol believed, and he was about to test it against the most authentic voice in American music. The gala had started at 7. Cocktails, speeches about supporting modern art, a silent auction for pieces nobody could afford, but everyone pretended to consider. Dylan had arrived late, walked in during the main course, didn't apologize, just sat down at his assigned table with people he'd never met. A gallery owner, an art critic, a collector who owned 3 Warhols, a fashion designer, a poet, 2 socialites whose names appeared in magazines. They'd all been thrilled when Dylan sat down. Bob Dylan, at their table. But Dylan didn't make conversation easy, answered questions with one word. Smoked, pushed food around his plate, looked uncomfortable in ways that made everyone else uncomfortable. 20 minutes into dinner, someone asked about his music, recent work, what he was creating. Songs, Dylan said. But what kind of songs? The gallery owner pressed. What are you trying to express? What needs expressing? The art critic laughed. That's very authentic. But isn't that outdated? This performance of sincerity? Dylan looked at him. Performance? This whole tortured artist thing. Very 1960s. We've moved past that. It's all about irony now. Distance. Warhol understands that. Art doesn't have to mean something. It just has to be. That's when Andy Warhol appeared at their table. He'd been making his rounds, saying hello to collectors, being photographed, looking bored in that way that made people feel they were boring him. But when he saw Dylan at table 12, something shifted. Warhol walked directly over, stood at the head of the table, looked down at Dylan. Bob Dylan, Warhol said, not a greeting, an identification. Andy Warhol, Dylan replied. Same tone. Are you enjoying the gala? It's fine. Just fine. Warhol's pale face showed nothing. We have Rothko on the walls, Pollock, masters of modern art, and you find it just fine? I don't know much about visual art, Dylan said, and that's when Warhol attacked. That's obvious, Warhol said, pointing now, finger extended toward Dylan's face. Because if you understood art, you'd understand what you do, isn't it? The table went completely still. Dylan set down his cigarette. What do I do? You write songs, popular songs, for mass consumption. That's entertainment, not art. What's the difference? Warhol smiled, that detached smile. Art makes you think. Entertainment makes you feel. You traffic in emotions. We traffic in ideas. Dylan nodded slowly. So you're saying art should be intellectual, not emotional. Art should be above emotion. Emotion is cheap. Anyone can feel. Art should challenge the mind, not manipulate the heart. A woman gasped. The critic leaned forward. The collector looked stunned. Dylan looked around, at the 8 faces watching, then out at the larger room. At least 200 people had stopped their conversations, turned toward table 12, sensing something happening. So all those people, Dylan said quietly, who listen to songs and find meaning in them, find comfort, find truth, they're wrong? They should elevate themselves, Warhol said, beyond cheap sentiment. Is that what you think art is? Elevation above human feeling? I think art is whatever I say it is, Warhol said. And I say what you do. 3 chords and complaining isn't art. It's just noise with words. For maybe 10 seconds, Dylan just sat there, looking at Warhol, at that silver wig, those black glasses, that pale face showing nothing but bored superiority. Then Dylan stood up. Not aggressive, just stood, calmly. You want to know what art is? Dylan asked. I already know what art is, Warhol said. Then let me show you what you're missing. Someone from the museum appeared, a curator, panicked. Gentlemen, please, this is a formal event. He challenged what I do, Dylan said, not to the curator, to the room, to the 200 people now watching. Said it wasn't art. I'd like to respond. The curator looked at Warhol, then at Dylan, then at the crowd leaning forward. How? The curator asked. Give me 5 minutes. A quiet room. Anyone who wants to come can come. What happened next would be talked about in New York art circles for the next 40 years, because Andy Warhol said something surprising. Fine. Let's see what you've got, folk singer. The MoMA had a small gallery on the 3rd floor. Intimate, white walls, spotlighting, could hold maybe 50 people if they stood. 200 people tried to fit inside. They couldn't, so people crowded the doorway, spilled into the hallway, pressed against walls to see. Dylan walked to the center. No guitar, no instruments, just him under a spotlight. Warhol leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, that silver wig catching light, waiting to be unimpressed. The curator started to introduce Dylan. Dylan waved him off. Andy says art should be intellectual, Dylan said. Above emotion. I want to ask everyone here, when you look at art that matters to you, really matters, what do you feel? Silence. Because I look at a Rothko, Dylan continued, those color fields, and I feel something about loneliness, about the gap between people, about trying to communicate when words don't work. Someone nodded. I look at Pollock, all that chaos, and I feel anxiety, the randomness of existence, Someone trying to make order from disorder. More nods. That's not intellectual, Dylan said. That's emotional. That's human. That's what makes it art. Warhol's expression hadn't changed, but he was listening. You say I manipulate emotion, Dylan said, looking at Warhol. Like that's cheap, but making someone feel something true, something they've felt but couldn't name, that's the hardest thing there is. Dylan closed his eyes, and he started to speak words. Not quite singing, not quite talking, poetry with rhythm, images stacked on images, loss and longing, and the ache of being human. No guitar, no melody, just words. Raw, honest, vulnerable. The room was silent, 200 people barely breathing. The words built, layers of meaning, metaphors that hit like truth, about disconnection, about people talking past each other, about the impossibility of really knowing another person, about exactly what everyone in that room felt but didn't have words for, until Dylan gave them words. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Then someone started crying, quietly. A woman near the front, real tears. Then someone else. Then another. Not sad crying, recognition crying. Someone finally said it, crying. Warhol stood against the wall, still expressionless, but his arms had uncrossed. Dylan opened his eyes, looked at Warhol. Still think it's just noise with words? For maybe 15 seconds, Andy Warhol didn't move. Just stood there processing what he'd witnessed. Then he did something nobody expected. He walked forward, through the crowd, people parting, until he stood directly in front of Dylan. That was... Warhol paused, searching for words, which itself was unusual. That was real, Warhol said finally. Dylan nodded. I built my career, Warhol continued quietly, but everyone could hear. On the idea that emotion is weakness, that sincerity is naive, that the only way to be smart is to be detached. And now, Dylan asked, now I'm wondering if I've been lying to myself for 20 years. The room gasped. Andy Warhol admitting vulnerability. You make soup cans, Dylan said. Not mean, just fact. I write songs. Both are art if they make people see the world differently. But yours makes people feel, Warhol said. And yours makes people think. We need both. Warhol looked around, at the 200 faces, at the woman still crying, at people moved by words, just words. I was wrong, Warhol said, loud enough for everyone. What you do is art, maybe the purest art there is. The curator tried to move everyone back to the gala, but Warhol asked for a few minutes. Private, just him and Dylan. They sat in that white gallery, two legends, two different philosophies. Why did you attack me? Dylan asked. Warhol lit a cigarette. Because you scare me. I scare you. Your sincerity scares me. Your willingness to be vulnerable. I've spent my career building walls, the factory, the wig, the glasses, the deadpan, all armor. Against what? Against being hurt. Against caring too much. Dylan understood. So you convinced yourself that not feeling was sophisticated, and you convinced me I was wrong in 5 minutes. They talked for an hour. About art, about fear, about the different ways people protect themselves. Warhol through detachment, Dylan through honesty. The irony, Warhol said, is that my paintings are more emotional than I admit. The Maryland Pieces, the Death and Disaster series. I'm processing grief, loss, but I hide it behind commercial imagery. That's still art, Dylan said, but I dismissed yours because it doesn't hide, because you just put it out there. Raw. Different approaches, same goal. Which is? Truth, Dylan said simply. When Dylan and Warhol returned to the gala, something had changed. The art world elite looked at Dylan differently. With respect, the woman who'd cried approached. Thank you for saying what I've been feeling. You gave it words. Others came, one by one, telling Dylan what his words meant, and Warhol watched. Learning. In the weeks after, Warhol started interview magazine discussions about emotion in art, about vulnerability, about whether detachment was protection or prison. He called Dylan twice. Long conversations about creating, about courage, They never became friends, too different, but they became mutual respecters. Warhol's work didn't change, but his understanding did. He stopped dismissing emotional art as naive. Dylan never forgot that night. In later interviews, when critics called his work too sentimental, he'd reference, "A painter who taught me that different doesn't mean wrong." Andy Warhol died in 1987. Dylan sent flowers. The card read, "You taught me that even armor is artistic choice." The story became legend, not because of the confrontation, because of what happened after. 200 people witnessed surface meet substance. Watched both men grow. Warhol learned that emotion isn't weakness, that vulnerability takes courage. Dylan learned that protection comes in many forms, that Warhol's detachment was itself a response to pain. The lesson transcends art. It's about being human, about the courage to feel in a world that rewards not caring, about respecting different ways of processing existence. Andy Warhol attacked Bob Dylan at a New York City gala on November 14, 1974. Dylan didn't destroy Warhol, he taught him, showed him that sincerity and sophistication aren't opposites. 200 people watched armor crack, watched philosophies shift, watched two legends humble themselves enough to learn. The moment when Andy Warhol, the king of cool detachment, admitted that feeling something was okay, and Bob Dylan, the king of raw honesty, acknowledged that protecting yourself is okay too. Surface and substance, shaking hands at a New York gala, a lesson that still resonates 50 years later.